Hello, everybody. Welcome to the CI webinar on managing HR during COVID-19. And of course, not just now, but post. I am absolutely delighted to have two amazing people with me. Talish Ray, who's been a very long time CI council member and an absolute expert on HR. She's our go-to person. Whenever we need advice, whenever we need to understand policy. We have Neelesh Gupta with us from Deloitte. Lots of experience in looking at how, everything from how HR structuring to performance to best practices. Really glad to have everybody here with us. We're just waiting for a lot of our participants to start joining. But as a bit of housekeeping, everybody, please note, if you have questions to ask, on your Zoom, there is a QA icon. Please ask all your questions in there. If you want to direct your question at any panelist, please put their name there. Please do not use the chat for questions. We want to keep this as interactive as possible, and so we will be going through questions, perhaps not in the order asked, but we'll try to get to everybody. But just first off, while we're waiting for everyone to join, Talish, how are things going? This must be incredible times. Talish, I think we lost your audio a bit.
Sorry.
Yeah.
These are incredible times because I don't think as a generation we have really seen this. If you look at it, Aditya, from about 1992 onwards, there has been a run that has been through with the Indian economy. Of course, there have been bumps along the way, but nothing like this. I don't think as a generation we've ever seen something like this on a war footing. So it is incredible times to be alive in, and it is incredible times to be a part of. So one can either look at it as a challenge or one can look at it as something that can be exhilarating. So it is a ride. It's a roller coaster ride right now.
Absolutely. And I think the lessons learned from now are going to hold true for many years forward. Neelesh, how about you? How are things going there?
Probably these are one of the most interesting times of my lifetime. And while people keep talking about a lot of frustration that comes from work from home and other aspects, I believe there are a lot of positives that I can see from these. First, spending time with family. I mean, I've never been around at home.
How's it been?
It's pretty lovely if you were to ask me, because the lifestyle that at least consultants live, you are not around home most of the times. And even if you're around, either you're on calls or doing something or the other. But this is that time
or
when you
flying anywhere, right? That's one of the big part, right?
Looks good from the other side, but living a consultant's life over a period of time, you get really...
The grass is always greener, eh? Well, fantastic. So as people are joining, I just want to sort of walk through how we are going to structure this, right? And so we are pretty much going to focus on two key aspects. One is going to be the legal aspects of things. What can be done during this crisis? And after, what do all these directives and advisory means? And second, we're going to a little bit try to focus on process. How to actually go about thinking about HR during this time. And just to, give context, we aren't in a degrowth situation. We are in an immediate contraction, right? Large parts of the economy are going up. Companies have, 20, 30-day cash that is going down. Customers are not paying. There's a supply chain crisis. And all of this means that people are going to cut costs. Now, every good company prioritizes their people. Right? People first. And I think in India, particularly, we've seen how important the role people play in actually getting things done. And so the last thing on any entrepreneur's mind, any businessman, any startup person, whether it's small or large, is that, look, I want to let good people go. I want to fire people. That's never something we want to do. But the position has arrived where I think a lot of people are now looking at their balance sheets, looking at their finance and saying that, look, if I don't do something today, I will not be here 2 months, 3 months to fight through these times and then succeed once a turnaround happens, perhaps at the end of the year. Now to start with that, just going into the basics, Talish, we're getting all these notices and advisories. Our prime minister came out and very strongly said, look, please pay everybody. Please make sure nobody has disruption. I think that was a very good overarching vision. But we had these we had some states sent orders and notices, some states sent advisories. What's the difference? Just quickly on that to start.
Right. So I think it's very important to remember right now that all the action that is being taken by the central government is under the the Disaster Management Act of 2005, wherein it has the enabling part. The state governments are also working under various, legislation. One of them is the Epidemic Act, as we call it. But given the nature of the two advisories, and these are the two I think most people should focus on, the two pieces of order that have come out, executive order, are the order that is dated from the MHA from the 24th of March, as well as the one on the 29th of March. Now, in the 24th of March is where the lockdown was announced, where it was announced as to what are the industries that would be open. And it was here that it was said that payment has to be made at any cost for the next 21 days where the lockdown is there for all employees, right? Now, there was a lot of confusion in terms of the fact whether it is binding on people, whether it is in the nature of advisory, and that is how on the 29th of March, the MHA came up with another notification. And in that notification, it again clarified all the doubts that had been there and clarified the fact that there were basically three things that had to be kept in mind. One, they talked about the industries that are functioning. They talked about the various circumstances and the sort of, the health and hygiene that had to be followed, and also the other advisories on health and hygiene. But very importantly, they said that during this period, for the 21-day lockdown period, it has been mandated, and therefore it is no longer an advisory. It is actually a mandate that all payments regarding pay would be made, that nobody would be terminated. Even if they are on leave, it will be treated as that they're working from home in that sense, and wages would not be withheld. So there's no confusion so far as we as lawyers go. We understand that it is discomforting, but please understand that where this particular notification of the MHA, which is dated the 29th or even the 24th as of that matter, is laying out the steps for the next 21 days of lockdown. So for the period of 21 days,
it's very clear.
Absolutely no.
Absolutely very clear. So, and I wanted to get that clarified upfront, because I'm still hearing people, there are still people asking, well, it's an advisory, how can they actually do this? But I think there is consensus among the legal community, among the HR community. Look, this is something that is there. And at least for the 21 days, we know. Now, beyond that, that still hasn't been clarified, and we'll have to wait for more updates from the government. So the big question, what we have to understand, what next? And I'm seeing a lot of participants come in. My request is we can't go through everybody, putting up their hands. If you have questions, we love them, we want them. Please put them in the Q&A. So click on the Q&A icon and type in your question there. If you want to use your name, use your name. If you want to go anonymous, that's fine as well. And if you have a question for a particular panelist, please make sure you mention their name so I can direct the question to that particular panelist. Fantastic. Now, while we're on this subject, on that notice, the first big part which I want to cover is what do employers need to do right now as of this day, right? There are essential services which have come out, and as more state advisories are coming out, more and more offices, banks, branches, etc., are being allowed to open. However, a lot of them don't understand that there are, or haven't been informed, quite frankly, that there are now strict health and hygiene guidelines. Could you just cover some of those which are mandatory, that everybody who's running an office or a warehouse or something needs to follow, whether essential services or not, at least for this period and maybe a few months down the line?
Yeah, so in terms of health and hygiene also, there is a notification that has come in, and that guideline has come in, which is a guideline of advisory from the Ministry of Labor and Employment for all workers' organizations and employers' organizations regarding hygiene. Now, what they're basically talking about in this guideline is the fact that if you are open and if you are functioning, whether at minimum capacity or you're functioning because they are a part of essential services or because it's a part of the supply chain management, these guidelines are very clear. They state exactly the same thing which is being talked about in terms of the COVID-19 situation. One, please sanitize your premises as you would sanitize any place that you're supposed to be, with the assumption that you may have some sort of, infection traveling in. The second is that all Workers that come in must be offered masks, and they must be also given all sorts of protection that is there. Please keep the mouth covered. There must be social distancing. Now, the thing about social distancing is that it does put a lot of people in jeopardy, because a lot of the times you have premises which would not allow as many people to be within that space.
Yeah, if you have a 500 square foot office, which was earlier having maybe 10 people, that's not going to happen anymore, right?
It's not going to happen. And we have to now get prepared for the fact that that social distancing will need to be maintained in all circumstances. So the government is clear that even if you are operating, so the thumb rule is that if you're operating in any sort of an enterprise at this point in time, you will follow the same health and hygiene standards that are being imposed everywhere else. The only additional part that they've put in is that A, ensure at all points in time masks are maintained. B, please also ensure that when employees come in, they are going through the process of being sanitized, which is to say that they wash their hands and they do it in the mandatory WHO way. So all of this has been put in the Labour Ministry. It is also available on the Labour Ministry website, the nic.in website.
And so that's the one source people should go to.
Absolutely, absolutely. And while it sounds like an advisory, please remember that when it is read with the 24th and the 29th notification of MHA, it is no longer an advisory, it is binding in nature.
Absolutely. So I think that's one of the big part. It's not just one notice, one notice, one notice. You have to be read in a structured format. Now, we are going to come to some questions, but what I do want to disclaim while we are here, free legal and free strategy advice is dangerous, right? So we are going to cover some very specific advice, and we're going to answer very specific questions, but do understand that without knowing the full context of your company, of your employees, of your industry, where you are, I would highly advise you to take this bit of information as a suggestion, as an advisory, an actual advisory, not a mandate, and go and get professional help if it's truly going to make that much of a difference. But we will try to get into specifics. I think before I grab Neelesh for a couple of these questions, we have Alka Kolji who's asked us, one big question: what is the consequence? I don't have cash in the bank. I can't pay my employees. Government is saying, pay me 21 days. What's the consequence of me for not paying?
Again, the Disaster Management Act becomes very clear. This is, I would rec the Disaster Management Act, which talks about the consequences of not obeying an order that has been passed under the Disaster Management Act, which says that anyone who willfully does it, basically there has to be intent to disobey the order, and that they have gone through it, including Section 58, which talks about organizations, which is body corporates, or there's a large definition of partnerships, includes any organization in that sense, which actually identifies as a body corporate or a partnership, which is running any sort of a unit somewhere. In case they do not follow any of the directives that have been issued by the government under the Disaster Management Act, then yes, there can be penal consequences. Now, those penal consequences could be an imprisonment right up to 1 year, or a fine, or both, as has been mandated if you look at the reading of Section 51 and 58 of the Disaster Management Act. So as such, effectively, again, I always urge everyone to think about it, that these advisories that have come in for the time being are only for 21 days. It is not that the government is not going to be aware of the fact that over and above 21 days, there are a lot of people who would not be able to function, where operational costs might become an issue. But for the 21 days, if there is an organization that says that they did not have the OPEX to sort of operate without some additional inflow that comes in, then that would be a bit hard for anybody to explain. So for these 21 days, yes, it is a punishable offense under the Disaster Management Act.
No, but I love the word what you use, right? Willful. So if a person doesn't have any bank balance in their bank account, obviously they can't pay, right?
I'm not sure that counts as that. It might be an error otherwise, but I'm not sure whether, not having the money in the bank would be one of those issues. I think, again, we have to see what the interplay would be post that, because I think, Aditya, we need to keep in mind that economically, as it is, there was a rough cycle that was going on. So there were a lot of units that were, or companies that were anyway under cost cutting measures, or were running out of their OPEX or CAPEX requirements were very high. So under that scenario, I do expect that there'd be a bit more clarity that would be provided. But as of now, for the next 21 days, or rather not the next 21 days, the 21 days from the 25th of March 2020, it is mandatory that it has to be paid unless there can be a reason to show that there was no intent. For example, if, say, suppose there is a person who's employed and has left that place of employment in panic, and you do not have a bank account, I suppose that would come under having the intent to pay. But I don't think that not the bank of them. I'm really sorry about that one.
No, fair enough. You know what? So there's a lot of amazing questions coming up, and I do want to go with them. But what we're also going to cover very specifically now is what are the options? What can employers do now and after the 21-day is over, which are reasonable and within the legal framework? And I have a list that has been circulating. We've talked about it with many other people. A lot of people have asked the same list in the question and answers. But the very first thing, Neelesh, this is where I want to get you in. You know, this is an emergency, right? For me, the last 10 days seem to be like, 3 months have gone, right? Things are moving so fast. Changes are happening, right? Obviously, certain people have gone into a panic mode as well. And, the last thing what you want to do is to take major HR decisions in a panic mode. And so what I'd love to get from you, and we'll keep following up, by the way, throughout the webinar on these best practices, where do you start? How do you make that list that, who has to be terminated, who has to go, absent, without leave without pay, sabbaticals, all of that stuff. And we'll come to all of that, but where do you start? And how do you do it without panicking?
See, there's a fundamental problem that we have observed with all our clients, and we keep advising them on this, that HR fundamentally always prepares for good times, right? All our HR strategies that we design are for good times. Practically every organization had a 2020 strategy which showed probably 3x growth and 5x growth and so on and so forth. Right?
Yeah, and some of them I've seen those beautiful slides, 10x, like Rocket Man growth. We're gonna.
Now, in times like these, you've got a lot of unprepared HR folks who have been given a mandate because of a cash flow crunch or for any form of mandate that has come from either the senior management or the board of directors to say that, hey, look, this isn't sustainable, do something. Now, the first thing that we start doing is that we start doing blanket cuts. Now, that is something that, at least in our advice, is the most dangerous thing to do. So how do you start? You start by going to the drawing board and basically saying that, hey, look, let me just think about totally redesigning my manpower strategy. What is that one approach that you could adopt? You could do a zero-based budgeting. And how do you do zero-based budgeting? You say that if everything was to be done from scratch, then how will my organization look like? What are those roles that I need to really critically staff? What are the roles that I really need to go away? While we'll cover this throughout the session, but the one message that I want to send right now is to basically say that do not do panic cuts. Do not just pick up a scissor and cut a function. Do not just pick up a scissor and cut a line. Those are the things that are the absolute biggest problems that could let your organization get into for the next 3 months.
So what I'm hearing from you is a very simple thing, right? Is that don't panic and say, look, everybody needs to take a 50% pay cut across the board, or we have to fire 50 people or 10 people. Let's just pick whoever we can fire quickest, and whoever's been the longest with us, or get safe. Those who are the shortest go, contracts, etc. Is saying no, take a pause, go back to a blank piece of paper, and rather than trying to delete people, is to start with a blank sheet of paper and start adding people.
Absolutely.
Right. And so then you sort of start off from the step up, that knowing who's actually needed. And rather than going into a cut mode, you're actually going into a positive additive mode.
Absolutely.
Now, this takes, I know Deloitte does this, and a lot of other of your competitors do this as well. it takes you a year to do this. How do you do it in a week or two?
See, number one, crisis times require crisis measures. So therefore, there are certain fundamentals that you need to stick with. Like, for example, if you could very clearly call out what are my profit centers, what are those profit centers which are going to generate money for me in the next 1 to 3 months, the moment lockdown enters. And now slice it by saying that which are those profit centers which can generate money for me, even when there is a lockdown, even with a virtual way, can they be generating money? So you start focusing on profit centers from a zero-based approach. Leave the support folks or leave the non-profit center or cost centers at the moment. And just do an organization-wide brush of where is the money coming from and where is the potential of this money coming from. One very important caveat in all of this is to also add that if now I was to superimpose on what I want versus what I have, and there will of course be a delta, right? That's the delta that you want to cut off. What is the time frame in which I'm going to need this delta back?
Right.
Is that time frame 1 month, months, 1 year, 18 months? And if you need those people back in the next 1 year, those are not the set of people to cut.
So you're drawing a clear time line here, right? You're saying that, look, anybody you need for the next 1 year, bad idea to cut them off now. Let's
Absolutely.
find another solution to bring down that cost. Let's find some creative ways.
Absolutely.
Because, it's going to take you that much time to hire them back. If you ask them to go 3 months, 6 months, you need them back. It takes 3 months again to hire that person. Guess what? You're in trouble now. And so please go ahead.
So that is one. Number two is that many a times when we're taking these haze decisions, right, of cutting off people, there is a loaded cost of severance. There is a loaded cost of hiring. And in many cases, it ends up being anywhere between 40% to 75% of the cost of having let that manpower be on rolls.
Right. So anyway, you haven't saved much money.
Yep.
So you think you've got rid of headcount, but actually the cost of severance paid, the cost of going through the entire process, any gratuity trust, everything else that has to be paid. And then in a year's time, either paying a consultant or hiring that person yourself, maybe buying out notice period, ends up being 60, 70% of the cost. So you should have, tried something else first, right?
Absolutely.
Brilliant. So I have a lot of questions here, and so let's get to some of the creative solutions that have been offered. I would love to get your ideas, pros and cons of these, and how best to do them. One of the big things is that everyone is saying that, look, get people to use their leaves, right? Their earned leaves, their paid leaves, their sick leave. Ask them that, look, cash them in now, right? And one, this is 21 period lockdown, and the second is post 21. What's the legal thought on asking people very politely but firmly to take their leaves?
Yeah, so Aditya, there's one thing that I must tell you. One, I think we started with this, that these are unprecedented war-like times. It's literally a world war, and greater than World War I and World War II, because both of these wars were fought pretty much in Europe. Here you have the entire world that is shutting down on this. So hoping to be able to give somebody a magic mirror in which they can see the future is absolutely something that we can't do at the moment. And therefore, I think Neelesh said very well that, in extraordinary times, look at extraordinary measures. And these are times of crisis. And therefore, as a part and principle of crisis management, please keep in mind that it has to be one day at a time. Right? So when you're talking about things like asking people to go on leave, these are mostly employees that are on contract and therefore governed by the Contract Act. It still does not take away the fact that for 21 days, you are supposed to be paying them. Now, beyond that 21 days, what's the law on it? Nothing much really. Of course, you can tell an employee that please go ahead and take all your paid leave for now. But please understand one thing. Why is leave offered in the first place, Aditya? It's offered because sick leave is a genuine cause. It's not like we take sickies, right? Or any other leave that may be offered for a relative purpose. You are not going to tell an employee later, it doesn't matter if you're in the hospital, please come to work. So yes, while a lot of companies are doing that, and I would say that yes, everybody has to take a sort of a benchmark test as to whether their industry can sustain it or not, because there are certain industries that have come to a complete standstill. So you have no choice but to do that. But there are those that are functioning, and at that point in time, telling those employees to take the leave, again, do a cost benefit analysis. Legally, can you do it? Yes, of course you can do it. But in the 21 days, let's be clear. The MHA said that there must be pay that would be provided for the 21 days starting from the 25th of March. Over and above, beyond that, if you're looking at employees asking them to put it in, be aware that these are things that there has been a notification by the Labor Ministry where they've actually asked all the states to look into the aspect that sometimes pays are not being given or salaries and wages are not being provided. They're being asked to go on leave. So be aware that you're doing it at your own risk unless you can justify it. Because for the 21 days, it's clear you have to pay. Now, over and above, if you're preparing already for what might be the future, no one knows. I mean, tomorrow, all it takes is a vaccine, and the next thing you know, COVID-19 would become one of those farcical things that we talk about. But then again, it could be something that shuts down the world for the next 18 months, according to some predictions. So between 18 days to 18 months, take a call. That's the risk. That is the extraordinary leadership that's called across in these times.
Absolutely. And so legally, after 21 days, theoretically, yes.
At the moment, yes. Don't know. Tomorrow, yes. MHA may come out with another
notice pending always at some point. Everybody here, a lot of you have asked for the notices and such. And what I'm going to ask you to do is join our Telegram group. And I'm going to put the link out to the Telegram group. It's been made public for the duration of this crisis. And I'm going to put that in the chat window of Zoom, so you get all of that. And if you join this, we will try to get this in as soon as possible. Neelesh, your thoughts on this?
So, fundamental point on asking employees to take leave. What is it that we are wanting to do? And Talish will have a point of view in terms of the legal mandates and so on and so forth. But you are trying to reduce your actuarial liabilities from an overall HR cost standpoint. And you're looking at, this is what my HR cost budgeted. This portion is what leave and its liabilities cost for. If I was to reduce this portion, my overall HR cost in my books will reduce.
Absolutely.
Now, if you've got a lot of cash with you, right? If you're a really cash rich organization, that is the moment where you can think about fancy things like asking employees to encash leaves, right? If you aren't, then don't even think of reducing this budget by encashing, because today it is going to hit your cash flow, which is going to be the biggest hurdle. You're trying to save cash so that you can continue to pay salaries. Don't be on a double whammy wherein you end up paying cash today on account of leaves and end up then having to let go of people.
So focus on the actual consequences. All of this sounds great in theory. The guy's gone on leave, I'm not paying him, but that's not really true. In the end of the day, that will come up, because you do have to give notice periods if you let people go as well. And those could have been adjusted against those.
That is one. And number two, the second part of this is to basically say that the leave balance that you have, which gets accrued year on year, right? There are certain mandates by either state-wise Shops and Establishments Act or by ID Acts, which says that there is a minimum number of accrual limit that you need to give.
You have to take care of.
So most of the organizations have accrual limits higher than that. So therefore, as an organizations, you can by your own discretion reduce that accrual limit. Try if you want to freeze that balance or forfeit it. It is totally your call, and therefore reduce your overall HR cost. The gamble is not to say that this is the headcount that I want to let go. The gamble is to say that this is the cost that I want to control. Now, in doing so, if leave is one of the option, and by all means use it. If the last resort is to let go of people, then that is what we will explore.
I think that's a very good point. There are other creative means rather than things that just hit. There's stuff you can do at a policy level that has impact on cash flows today, rather than just, what is a traditional HR to HR approach. Now, we have a bunch of fantastic questions on one simple thing. We've seen states announced pay cuts, starting from the state government all the way down. A few hours ago, we had the cabinet say that, look, Parliament is going to take a 1-year pay cut. A president and vice president of India are going to take a 30% pay cut. So 2 quick questions on that. One, during this 21 days and post 21 days, can you ask for people to take pay cuts? What's the legality of it? And second, what if they volunteer to take pay cuts? Talish, first to you to get on the legal angle, and Neelesh would love to get your perspective as well.
Well, in terms of pay cuts, now let's look at employees in 2 categories. One of those whereby there is a minimum wage that is announced, and we will have to pay whatever is the minimum wage as per every state. Going below that, or if somebody is sitting at a basic minimum wage and asking them to take a pay cut at this point in time, is a proposition that might be in the gray zone, but definitely unless there is any labor notification to that effect from the state, I would say that it's hazardous, right? The second is about employees that are your white collar employees and asking them to take a pay cut. Again, because it's contractual, it is something that can be done and it can be explored. There's nothing stopping people from doing it legally. However, what we find is that there is on the ground, we also find certain amount of strong arm tactics where there is no build-up in terms of a stakeholder consensus. Remember, the disadvantage to that is that tomorrow, if there is no build-up on this consensus and there is a person who chooses to go outside of the 21 days, in case there is an extension, chooses to go and talk about it to some court or the other, they might just be entertained. Because again, remember, the MHA says for 21 days, over and above beyond that. You and I, we are having a talk, Aditya ji, you say, Talish ji, it's great that you're on this thing, but I think we need to cut down this. And I nod my head simply on that. I have no agreement on that, but it has been unilaterally put in across to me because the president of the group or the CEO or the senior HR folks or the CXOs have come up with this idea. So what happens when there is no consensus? That is when there might be a possibility that a liability might build up, because you must understand that in any contract, especially a contract of employment, it needs to be something where both parties agree upon it and they re-sign on the terms. Because if you have a contract, it can't just be a unilateral change.
So I want to pause here, right? So we have Kanika who's asked this question in very specific, and I am going to paraphrase Kanika. So, don't be upset for me for not asking in the exact way you put it. But let's just say, right, you are a company in India, you have a couple of 100 employees, you were inspired by, what the CM of Telangana did. You were inspired by what our parliament did. And the board gets together, all senior management consent and said, you know what, we are in trouble. This is going to be a huge financial crunch. We don't want to let anybody go. So guess what? We are going to take staggered pay cuts. The CEO raises his hand and says, I want to take a 50% pay cut or forego my salary. And guess what? We are going to push this all the way down to the person. And because we are such good guys, the guys at the top take the maximum pay cut. And as we go down the hierarchy, it's smaller, smaller, smaller. Wherein, let's say the lowest person on the rung, maybe 5 to 10% compared to a 50%, right? From a third party perspective, looks like leadership, looks like great. The guys at the top took the biggest pay cuts. Everybody else down the line, everybody took a hit for the organization. One, you mentioned that, well, that's nice, but did all of those people agree, or was it just a nice PR announcement, right? So 2 things on this. One, can you do that? And second, do you have to get everybody to sign off on it, even if you've announced it, but then you still have to go down to these individuals and get them to sign off on it?
Well, yes. So every person that you hire in your company who's a white collar labor comes in terms of signing a contract of employment. So if there's a change in the terms of employment, it cannot be unilateral. It has to be signed off by both parties. So as simple
they have to accept it. So they have to send a letter of acceptance. And if they don't accept it, then you pursue your other options. So Kanika, so the short version of your answer is yes, you can do it, but you will have to do the follow-up to make sure that everybody who is impacted signs off on that and agrees to it. And if they don't, then you need to have a plan B. And we'll come to some of those plan Bs. Neelesh, any thoughts on this? Organizational wide, I know you said this was a terrible idea because you should be doing that ground up to understand who's important and who's not. Do these work? Does it make a difference? Does it increase organization morale that everybody's in?
So this is a huge change management question, and I'll not talk a lot about change management in terms of how do you do stakeholder alignment. And when I say stakeholder, all employees combine to say that, hey, look, we are in a bad time. We need to support this organization. If you are not able to sustain today, tomorrow there will be no jobs, and so on and so forth. So you do a lot of change management and communication around it, which is leadership communication. But I'll get on to some matrices which are important to decide what is the amount of pay cut to be decided, rather than saying that the CEO put their hand up saying that I am taking 50%, so the vice presidents will take 40%, the general managers will take 30%, and so on and so forth, and the last guy takes a 5%. No. Pay is a function of affordability for any organization. So, and how do you decide the affordability? You pick up certain ratios. What is the most important ratio that you pick up while you're deciding pay is the payroll cost to revenue ratio, or payroll cost to profit ratio. So bottom line or top line, whichever is more important to you, pick up that. Now, there were certain good times wherein you had a certain ratio. There were certain bad times wherein you had a certain ratio. Basis on the affordability today, the dip in top line and bottom line today, you decide on the ratio that with which you can live with for the next 3 months, for the next 6 months, for the next 9 months, along with a recovery plan for both top line and bottom line, so that this ratio can improve. So let's say you decide that if you generate 100 crores of revenue, you'll pay 10 crores of salary. So therefore the ratio is 10%. And because of this impact, you ended up generated only 90%, 90 crores of revenue. So therefore the affordable number from a payroll standpoint is 9 crores for you. So fundamentally the cost has to move from 10 crore to 9 crore at an overall level, right? So it is a 10% payroll cost cut that you're wanting to announce. Now here is where you draw an organizational pyramid, okay? And then start putting in employee affordability into it, as well as employee affordability means that if I earn 10,000 rupees, what is the disposable income that I have, and what is it, where do I spend it on? And then you make that pyramid and say, what is my cost pyramid going to look like? And very strategically decide where will this sum of 10% come from. So can top management contribute 3% to it? Will the bottom management contribute only to 1% of it? Those are the kind of decisions that you take, and then go with a plan to the organization saying that, boss, here is how life is going to look like. Do you all agree?
And so it sounds very nice to say, look, everybody's taking a pay cut, right? And I think, but unless it's based on actual numbers that connect to operations, to revenue, to profits, to all of that, that's more of a PR exercise than something that's actually going to save the organization. And everybody, this is very important. Morale is important. Setting leadership is very important. No one's arguing about that. But for your organization, you have to be very careful. Does it even make a difference? Because there's some industry where you have, 85% of your cost is labor. Some might be 15%, right? Now, cutting salaries across the board might be a nice, significant cultural thing to do. But if it's not going to move the needle, you're better off taking that pain and cost cutting and spending it elsewhere, or figuring out that, as this thing, zero-based HR budgeting, taking it from the scratch and saying, look, we'd rather pay everybody their full salary, but these individuals who no longer can contribute to the organization because the world has changed, we find a nice way to ask them to transition out. And so it's not that everybody feels pain for no reason at all, right? I think that's a great point made there.
And do not forget about your key talent, Aditya.
Absolutely.
That I keep telling people.
You don't want to lose your key talent, right?
Who are the value generators? Can you identify them and ring fence them, irrespective of what the times are? And like it's become a millennial thing these days. The millennials want the winner takes all approach is the one which is prevalent. Now, if you were to do a blanket, right? And then there will be certain set of millennials who will say that, hey, look, I was contributing to making sure that this organization turns back. Still, I'm taking the hit. Now, I don't want this socialistic approach to be prevalent. Some people may like socialism, but they may say that, hey, look, I want to go away. And then your value drivers go away. That is what is the problem. So you need to identify who are my value drivers, who are not my value drivers, even in the function that you have decided to retain.
And you have to really take those hard calls now. Aditya, I am going to go back to sort of the HR toolbox. We have some questions around, can you do, for example, we're almost, the 21 days are going to end. And then we've already gone through one pay cycle, and we're going to go through another pay cycle after that. And, in that time, there was one big suggestion that came that instead of paying salaries, give an advance on salary. And and give those advances so people have money when they need it most during this difficult time. But then at least you're not having to pay a lot of the statutory payments because it's an advance on salary. And then with cash flow, you delay salaries further. So you're a little bit improving your cash flow. You are giving people money in their pocket. You're not having to worry about the statutory taxes, the hidden payroll taxes, the ESI, the PF, and all of that, which can add up to a substantial portion of the salary. And then you say, look, we will pay those out 15 days late, 1 month late. So just to get a little bit of cash flow breathing room. What's your sense on that? Doable? Talish, is that doable?
Where the doable and the strategy part is there, I'd actually request Neelesh to come in. But
sure.
I just did want to point out here that there has been a notification that has come out with regard to the Employee Provident Fund. And that specifically states that in case there is a unit that has less than 100 employees, or rather...
Correct. The government will pay for that, right?
No, government will pay that for the next 3 months. They can take about 75% of their EPF or up to 3 months of their actual basic plus the cost as advance pay. So that's something that is also a sort of a bit of a relief, because there might be people who might be in a situation where they might need additional for medical expenses or any sort of hike in expenses that may take place because of these telling times. But outside of that, I'll leave the floor open for Neelesh, because he'd be the best person to answer.
So my suggestion there, Aditya, and thank you, Talish, for the legal opinion, is to basically say that, and by the way, we've all lived these 2 weeks of the slowdown. How much have we spent and where have we spent? In fact, if you were to ask me, my expenses have gone down at least by 50%, right? And once again, coming back to where do those set of people and where does their disposable income go, and so on and so forth. As an organization, these are the times wherein you say that, hey, look, we are creating a fund, and this is what is through market practices that is coming up. We are creating a fund wherein if there is any form of medical exigency, here is the hospital to go to. The money will be taken care by the organization, and we'll figure out how to adjust in the salary per se, right? And then you keep continuing your normal basic wages that you are required to disseminate, rather than once again fast burning your cash. Because paying 2 months or 3 months of salary today and then going blank for a 3-month period actually inhibits your ability to manage cash better.
Right.
Is what I basically feel.
So you would not want to give that advance salary at all. You would say that, punt it as long as you can,
yes.
just to preserve that cash. So it's actually this advance salary thing, even part of it might be a good legal hedge, but is it actually going to impact your cash flows?
And be that angel HR, right? And wear that angel hat and say that, hey, look, what will I take care of? I'll take care of any form of medical exigency that you get in. I will take care of ABCD things that you get in, and that's a pool that the organization has created, rather than disseminating 100% of advanced salaries to 100% of employees.
So I have a very interesting question from an attendee, obviously a very stressed person, right? So this person is, works in the retail industry. This is an anonymous question, right? They were supposed to get their pay. They are not really getting their pay, right? The shops are shut, the malls are shut. The company's obviously under a lot of stress. Now, this person is a little bit of a junior employee. So he's really worried that is this the time? Should he be calling HR and saying that, hey, you have to pay me? Lockdown 21 days, because his worry is that if he makes that call, they'll tell them that, hey, you have 2 options, either work without pay and we'll figure it out once we have money, or you can resign.
If you were to ask me, I would have made that call. If I was that employee, I would have made that call to at least get a clarity rather than being uncertain. See, if there is a problem in terms of payroll being administered by your employer, then every employee, it is a moral right to inquire on when is my pay going to come, irrespective, because the chances are that if you're not getting paid today, there are a very high chance that the plans on reducing the workforce permanently is already on the cards. So might as well get a clarity early on. And
so be certain today, right? Make that call, take that hard hit, and say, look, please tell me one way or the other, because then let me start exploring other options.
Absolutely.
So to Mr. Anonymous, I think this is great advice. Be kind, be polite, saying, hey guys, maybe it was missed, maybe it was a payroll error. If you could give me some guidance, when I would be getting this, could be 5 days, 10 days, 20 days. And, if this actually means that we are going to not pay people for a while or have to shut down, tell me that now. I will look at other opportunities. And I know it's going to be a very hard job market out there after this. But it's important, therefore, that you start looking now, then wait 15, 20 days or 1 month, 2 months from now, when the real layoffs will start, is to really seeing where do you want to work. And if your organization you feel is not going to be able to do that. And I think, by the way, Nish, I think this is an advice to all employers also. I think it is better that you tell your employees today that, look, we don't think we can continue this. If you can find a job, please try to find a job now. Because I'd rather see people in the job market now calling up, emailing, using their network to find a position, at least putting their name out there today, than wait for the bloodbath that's going to come in 30 days, right? Because then this 21-day option is gone. The moratorium on termination is gone. Organizations have gone to their zero budgeting, and suddenly people are getting these notices. And it's better that they know that now, rather than knowing that a month, 2 months down the line. So the kindest thing you can do, quite frankly, if you've made a decision, tell it to your employees now. If you're an employee and you think your company has made a decision, work with them to get that information earlier. The later you get that, the harder it's going to be for everybody to work through it. A couple of more questions we have here.
There are two messages that I want to give.
Please go ahead, Nilesh.
Is to the set of employees. It is not to be blanketly assumed once again that there is nobody who's hiring. There are industries that are hiring, and I can name them. So hospitality at the moment is the biggest one which is hit, but e-commerce in hospitality is the one which is hiring. Right?
Absolutely.
FMCGs continue to hire, and so on and so forth. So to employees, the point is to basically say that, hey, look, there are industries that are hiring. Please widen your horizon. Figure out what skills do you have and how can they be relevant for the set of people that are hiring at the moment. To employers, this is one of the most out of the box thing that at least I've heard in the last 10 days is that this is a shoemaker in this country. What they did was that they released an advisory to their employees saying that, hey, look, this is a tough time, and of course we will have problems with regards to cash flow. We will have problems with regards to paying people, and the utilization that all of you have at the moment is decimally low because of our stores being shut. So what they did was that they partnered with one of the largest retail modern trade chains in this country, and they said that, hey, look, our store employees are available to work for you, because that retail modern trade chain was having a problem of people not available to work because of.
And so suddenly they said, look, guys, let's become a contract service company, take our guys for 2 months, 3 months while you have this sudden jump. Obviously, post COVID-19, you're no longer going to have that pressure as normalization happens. I think that's a great idea. And that's something that has been shared by a number of our other CIM members, is this notion of finding tangential industries, right? We spoke with Bikram Bedi, the president of Gophers, in our last webinar. And one of the big things is that they need a lot more employees suddenly, right? And now they're looking at tangential employees in other industries and saying, hey, for example, textile workers, you know how to do warehousing, you know how to do machine operations, you know how to do that. Can we get them? And I think this is a very interesting point, is that rather than waiting for your employees to get scared and joining them, is for the companies to reach out to these guys and saying, look, you're hiring, I have 50, 100 people ready to go. I will deploy them to you. You cover their cost. Once this 3 months is over, I'd like them back because I'll need them back. And I think most employees will also be happy because nothing stops. It's not that they're going to have to stop, redo their entire payroll, reapply for a job, go through all of that. They just change work locations. They just change industries. And then in 3 months, they go back to what they were doing. I think this is a phenomenal idea. And it's something that I would recommend to a lot of us to try. I'll give you another example for the UK government. For all its NHS new hospitals, they've partnered with EasyJet and Virgin to get all airline employees to come and help operate the hospitals, because they have customer service, they know rules, they follow regulations, they can train them up easily. They're all certified in basic first aid, CPR, all of that. And so I think that's a fantastic idea. Does this work? Or, you know, is there some permit a company needs to be an HR staffing firm, or this is something they can do day one? What are we missing here?
HR as the cost profit center.
Sorry,
sorry.
Go ahead.
Talish, go ahead.
Is that, sorry, so I'll take the lead on that, Neelesh. So no, I don't think that there is a specific permit. Of course, there are certain industry specific requirements, but again, I want to take off on 2 points here, picking up from where Neelesh said about, you know, one company actually utilizing the stronger areas of strength of another company or organization. Personally, as a person as well, I feel that, you see, this is a time where the country needs us. Our corporates need us, our organizations need us. And instead of asking at all points in time, what's in it? What is the government doing for me? I'd go back to John F. Kennedy and say, what are you doing for the country? How many people are you going out to help? Because these are unprecedented times. So there's one part that is there where I think there needs to be a concentration in terms of the fact that if this was a war, how would I be helping my country, and looking at it similarly like that. The second is about permits and other things. I don't think that there is going to be too much of an issue in terms of establishment. I think at every point in time, you have the government coming out with requisite lists and requesting people, whether it is, you know, small tools manufacturers to turn into open source ventilator suppliers, or, you know, actually looking at governments. I think there was a great example that came up, was that one of the state departments turned around and ensured that one of the local units, local not-for-profit, started manufacturing hand sanitizers, which were being sold for as little as 20 rupees. So,
so I think it's a war. So everybody's very happy to retool, to change. I am going to ask the big question here, right? A lot of people are saying, look, you can't terminate anybody during this time, but they can resign, right? And I know of people who have resigned, who are planning to resign, and said, you know what, this is a good time as any. Obviously, there is resignation for real reasons. Otherwise, people are asked to resign. It looks better on their resume. They can come up with stories. You don't have to go through all the issues around termination and the legal thing. Neelesh, I want to start with you, and then Talish, I want to get into you on the legal aspects. What are some of the incentives that organizations are giving for people to resign? What does a classic severance package look like?
See, severance typically has been in the range of 1 month to 3 months of pay for every completed year of service. That's the typical range that we have seen from a severance standpoint. Considering these times, employers who would want to be on the benevolent side would go towards 3 months of severance pay. The ones which are having strong cash flow issues would end up being at the mandated 15 days, which is there. And Talish can talk about the mandate from an ID standpoint. But this is what the severance goes on from a market practice perspective. On top of that, there are outplacement services that organizations provide, which is where you engage a recruiter and give the profiles of your people, and therefore pay the recruiter for every outplacement that has been done. Some really good employee-friendly practices that we have seen is, while you're doing severance, is for folks whom you think that finding employment would be very difficult and they would practically be left jobless for a longer period of time. What you do is you pay things like gratuity, assuming that they were till the age of 60 with you, and therefore compute gratuity accordingly. So these are some of the best practices, but from a severance standpoint, 1 to 3 months of pay for every completed year of service, outplacement services, and some benefits like gratuity or others being paid out to people.
Actually, the legality of it. Now, I know a lot of contracts have notice pay. when you're doing asking, of course, if somebody resigns, that doesn't apply to the employer, it applies to the employee, and you waive it. What is the severance you have to legally provide?
All right, the answer to that is two simple words. It depends. It really just depends on the contract. It depends on the policies of these corporates that are there or organizations that may be there. There's no one size fit all. But at the end of the day, if an employee wants to resign or part from the services that they are providing to whichever organization, it's per their choice. How does it run? It is a reading of the policy of the organization plus the contract under which they've been hired. And those two, when read together, will have to be implemented in case they resign.
So that's the easiest. So I think that's there. But just to put this out, right? I think all of us, want to make sure that employees are taken care of, and everybody thinks that asking an employee to go or asking them to resign is a bad thing. But if you can structure an incentive package, give them money up front, right? Maybe help them get recruited into another industry, maybe provide some job training. One of the great things I've seen is that even though you resign, they'll say, look, we'll carry your health insurance with you for another 3-4 months, right? So at least you have that, so your family's safe, everything happens there. So there are ways that you can cushion it, and you can actually make it attractive for people to say, look, we'll make it worth your while to take 2 months, 3 months off. Fantastic. Let's talk about sabbaticals. A very nice way to say long time leave without pay. Neelesh, do they work? This is in India, that's a very rare thing to ask people to take a 3-month or a 6-month sabbatical and go do something else, or a 1-year sabbatical. Do you see it? Does it work?
Post sabbaticals would end up running into furloughs, and Talish can talk about what does a furlough mean and what are the typical legalities around it. But coming to an industry practice, I don't think forced sabbaticals work for an organization. It creates a bigger motivational problem in the organization than it solves for. And that is when you start finding that panic suddenly increasing manifold in the organization. And
so it's equivalent of announcing layoffs, right? Since people are being forced to take sabbaticals, well, theoretically you're laying them off, right? Especially on furloughs. Very rare word used in India.
Yeah, but that's because you see, under the Indian employment laws, furlough is something that actually comes across from the term from UK laws, Commonwealth laws, and as
while her network comes back, fundamentally any form of unpaid leave ends up being
it's either the Industrial Relations Act or the Contracts Act. So furlough itself, while it's an HR concept, in terms of legal concepts, I don't think that furloughs are something that we explore very much, because again, these are things that are they can be structured within one's employment policies or contract, but as such there's no, the law is pretty much silent on the concept of furlough. But if you ask me in terms of whether furloughs work or they don't, in India, what we've seen is that because there is a lot of silent how would I put it, underemployment. You see, sometimes we have bloated organizations, and Neelesh will be able to talk much more about it.
Talish, I'm going to interrupt you. Could you redefine furloughs for us? We lost you during that critical one sentence.
Right. So what I was saying was that
I think the definition is first.
Is something that laws. But if you're asking me whether furlough has been, sorry?
Talish, if you could pause 1 second, because we lost you again during that sentence.
Okay, so why don't we take it 5 or 7 minutes, because it's showing that my internet connection suddenly has gone unstable. Let's try and take this 5 or 7 minutes from now.
Sure. Neelesh, furloughs. We'll get your definition.
Any form of unpaid leave which an employee is put due to reasons which have been defined is called as a furlough. So can a unpaid sabbatical, is it equivalent of a furlough? In my limited understanding, yes.
Absolutely right. And these are typically what, 15 days, 30 days, 1 month, 2 months?
So I've seen it going as high as 2 years in the market. organizations offer 2 years sabbatical to people, but then there are very different reasons. So like,
Obviously,
for
because of,
example,
and a very high-end think tank consulting organization versus a small manufacturing organization, very different in terms of time and talent. And then how do you take sabbaticals on that, or an education community versus something else? I have a couple of very interesting questions here on performance management. And I have a few people who have asked that, hey, everybody's work from home. 21 days later, we still might have a significant of our workforce still working from home. Now, let's not get into a discussion on tools on performance management, because we'll be here forever in terms of remote tools. But, how do you measure performance when people are not right in front of you? Are there some quick tips that people can use today to at least get a sense of who's working, who's not, what's their productivity, and intervene now?
So first and foremost, the most important thing in all of this is to first trust your employees. Please trust your employees that they would be working, right? Don't go by the theory X of motivation, which says that employees would want to run away from work and so on. So that's the first part. Second part of it, on what are some of the ways in which you can measure performance, is to let go of 2 or 3 concepts which have been ingrained in us, which are time, on which the time aspect is very long. And one of them is MBOs. MBOs will not work in these times. BSC, Balanced Scorecard, where the time horizon is 1 year, may not best work in this regard. What organizations can do to be nimble and to be agile from a performance management standpoint in this period is to rely on some things which is known as OKRs. OKRs are objectives and key results. You define those bite-sized 15 days objectives that you want to accomplish as a team, as an individual. And this is where HR has to play that role of being that facilitator to define objectives that are to be accomplished in the 15-day period or any remote working period that you have defined for yourself. Assign key results to it, in terms of which are basically KPIs, which tell you that has that been completed? If completed, then by what efficiency and what effectiveness? In performance management, we end up missing the element of effectiveness most of the time, right? We only measure whether the efficiency has been done or not. So you start covering from an effectiveness standpoint, which is your key result.
Absolutely. And Neelesh, I'm going to interrupt you. By the way, OKRs are something that have become industry standard across India. This is not new anymore. It was new maybe 5 years ago. You can Google these, type in OKR HR. You will get a lot of free tools, a lot of guides, a lot of things which you can do. So this isn't a very complicated concept. It's a very simplified thing. As Neelesh has said, just try to bring it down to a window that is easily measurable, because you can't wait for a quarter or a year to pass to get your balance scorecard in, or get your thing. You need to understand what's happening now. And a tool like OKR, for example, which is a much smaller tool, and I'm sure you could take it down to a week if you wanted, right? And then really measure that what's happening on a week-to-week basis. And if you're doing the zero budgeting thing along with that, I think that really helps you. One of the big feedbacks we've got from a lot of CI members is that for the first time, they've discovered the hidden gems in their organization. People who are quietly working, doing amazing amount of work, but because they weren't getting face time with the boss or with the team, their contributions were not being recognized. But because they are, now in a remote work environment, where everybody has to show their contribution, they are actually getting recognized. And so I think there's also a positive angle to this. When you're measuring performance with something like OKRs or some other tools that can come, is that you might find amazing performers who you didn't know were there in your organization. And now you have a better understanding of your total HR strategy. I'm going to spend a couple of minutes. We have about 5-10 minutes. We have a lot of questions, but a lot of questions around, Talish and I joke always that we are using proxies now for measuring what happens next. Air India has now taken bookings till 1st May. So maybe 1st May is the new date. But, obviously things are going to change post COVID-19, right? And it'll be very sad if companies who've gone through these high stress times right now, we've talked for the past 1 hour about all the things, whether it is, asking people to go on sabbaticals, or furloughing them, or trying advanced salaries, or asking them to do their leaves, or or asking them to go or leave the organization. But the good part is also there's been a phenomenal change on how work is done and measured, right?
Yeah.
And I think all of us have gotten comfortable with doing work over a video conference. Ashutosh Gupta from LinkedIn had a great slide. He said, who is driving your digital transformation, your CEO, your CTO, or COVID-19? I would argue same thing applies. Who's driving your HR transformation? Your CEO, chairman, your CPO, CHRO, or COVID-19. And I think this is a great time for companies to really relook at how they're doing HR, how they're looking at performance, how they are fundamentally looking at their contracts from the legal aspect also, contract versus permanent versus freelance employees. But I'd love to get some crystal balling from both of you, starting with Talish. What are some of the key things that will happen? You mentioned at the very start, this is a once in a generation phenomenon. And when we've seen these happen, even in 2008 or across the world, or even 9/11 or during the dot-com bust, there were changes that reverberated for almost a decade after, right? What are you seeing some of the changes that will happen now?
So I think this is in terms of law. If you ask me in terms of the changes, I think it's going to bring about a greater amount of civic sense. That's the first that goes, because let's admit it, health and hygiene is an issue where our productions are concerned, where our supply chains are concerned. I see supply chains getting strengthened. I see a lot coming up in terms of technology laws, because we're finally beginning to interact with technology, something that has not happened. Because I must point out here that our IT Act, for example, the Information Technology Act, is from the year 2000, and it barely has any talk about what can happen with the kind of technologies that are coming in from work from home. So I see a lot of definition coming about. Really, if I look at all the reports that are there, in law, I don't see too much of a change taking place. Effectively, we will get back to business as usual, and things will continue to be the same for lawyers, except that I think we'll just stop having on-site meetings and move on to other platforms. That's about it.
Fair enough. Neelesh, your crystal balling.
So the first and foremost thing that I would want to say is that basic things like digital literacy are going to take center stage now, wherein it will be mandated for everybody now that the country has experienced this work from home concept to say that, boss, you need to know how to probably log into a Zoom call, right? And the basic fundamentals of digital literacy, which in a way and form has been poor in this country. So those are the kind of skills that will take center stage. Number two, from an overall organization standpoint, there is when 2009 crisis happened, enterprise risk management became one of the core activities that organizations started doing. We would start seeing the emergence of disaster management for COVID-like scenarios also becoming a part of the organization's strategy. We would start seeing virtual collaboration being accepted way more than what it has been in the past. In the next, the emphasis on, hey, look, only face-to-face meetings solve the real business problems is going to decrease. And at the end of this, when we come out of it stronger, that fundamental appreciation for the human race, in my limited opinion, is going to increase.
I think that's a very positive point to look at. The only few things that I would add, I think this is a phenomenal time. I think this is the time where personal and organizational reputations are made. I think we are going to see a lot of people step up and take extremely great just plain old leadership. They're going to show that, look, this is, as Talish said, this is a wartime. And I think this is where that will be made. And I think already people are starting to understand who are the companies and who are the people who are actually putting themselves out there and doing amazing things. And then those who are absent. And I think that will also go down to every individual employee. that, have you stood up for your company? Are you working the 24 hours that is required to work during a war to really help it get through? And if you are, I think employers should and will recognize that. I think nobody wants to lose high productive, good employees if they can help it. And I think everything we've discussed today is predicated on that notion that everybody wants to keep extremely high, good, productive, great attitude employees and find a way they can still be alive 3 months, 6 months from now while keeping those. Any last thoughts, Talish, Neelesh, before we wrap up?
I was just reading one of the chats that Rishabh has sent to all panelists, and I don't find anything to be more appropriate than his thought. In fact, I have been the biggest proponent of the thought to say that never let a good crisis go waste.
Well, that's at least a silver lining there, right? So I think, as Nishi said, it's a great time for those who have not done it so far to take a hard look at their HR and really take those critical, tough decisions. Honestly, we should be doing those even in a normal time, right? We should not be waiting for crises to have lean, efficient, good organization structures. Talish, last few words?
Yeah, so for me, I think it would be that if I were to advise everybody in my capacity as a legal counsel, it would be that watch carefully in terms of what the government is bringing about. Please just stop panicking here. At the moment, the government is in crisis management mode, which means that it has to take a call for every week as it comes, looking at responding to the ground. So therefore, right now, whatever is applicable for the 21 days, which is effectively in that sense till about the 14th of April, wait and watch and keep yourself well read about it instead of getting into panic reactions. What we're seeing is complete panic across in terms of what do we do, how do we do it. Take it one step at a time. Everybody is going through the same dilemma. It is not that the governments will not understand or the bodies will not understand. It is just a time to sort of take an inward deep breath as an organization and look at what is going to be there in the future and allow it to be, all your calls, strategic calls, to be taken, given in mind that each of these legally right now are short-term measures. These are not long-term measures. So there is no need to stick with the fact that, all right, if the government said 21 days, it's going to be for the next 6 months and I need to be prepared for it. Great, please be prepared for it, but don't go in thinking that this is going to be the situation. So just my advice, take a deep breath, follow legal advice in terms of follow all government advisories. They are for your own good. Remember, you don't pay your employees, you will have a market that will go into a slump. Once we come out of it, you will also have, other employees not wanting you to join. So look at long-term repercussions of each one of your discussions or decisions that are taken at this point in time, because those are going to be affecting, and in terms of that, also looking at the magnitude of things. So be aware of that and be very aware and cautious of that. So that's the word that I would leave it with.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Adish. I wish we had another half an hour, 1 hour. There are so many amazing questions here. Here's what we're going to do. So I have put the Telegram channel link in the Zoom chat. Please join that. I am going to get those specific notices, including the hygiene notices, including the 2 government notices, and anything else that seems to come out. We will post it there. So at least so everybody can read them. We are a big believer here at CI of people reading stuff in their original form. I think it gives you a lot of insight into the way the government is thinking. Please, 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 as suggested, this is all general advice. Many of you have asked some very difficult personal advice questions. I wish we could have gone into those given the time, but please take proper legal advice. Don't listen to WhatsApp messages. Don't listen to, newspaper articles or things posted. Your scenario is unique. Every unique scenario has a unique solution to it. So try and make sure that you get customized advice on this. I do want to inform, of course, we have an entire slate of panels coming up. And I am going to request Neelesh here to, if we can, a number of people have asked us that can we do a quick education webinar on zero budgeting and some of the strategy. And so I will follow up with him to try to see if we can get that done for everybody as well. And we can do at least an hours on focused on just 4 or 5 toolkits, perhaps the OKRs and such. and we'll see if we can get all of you back for that. Thank you very much for all those who have joined us today. Once again, I wish we could have gone on longer. Please do look at all the other panels that are coming up. And if anybody wants to join CII as well, we are always welcoming new member companies. And this is something that we think is a great value add for all our members. And you get access to the entire CII network, as well as help and advice using that. So thank you so much. And thank you for being with us today. Have a great evening, everybody.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, everyone, for attending.